Good afternoon. I'm Holly Schroeder, Chair of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and our meeting facilitator is Tara Bravo with CV Strategies. As you just heard, the audio, video, and chat features of this meeting are being recorded, and it is being conducted in accordance with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N2920. To begin, all SAC committee members and staff are unmuted. Please mute your device until you are ready to speak and avoid feedback and background noise. I'll be doing that as I have some going on behind me. And then unmute yourself to comment or respond. Committee members should only use the chat feature for meeting management purposes and not to engage in discussion. Members of the public are muted and video is off upon joining the meeting, but will be unmuted for public comments and questions. I will call for general public comment at item 2, then again for each separate agenda item. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. You have 3 options for those comments. You may indicate in the chat feature at any time during the discussion that you wish to be called upon. You may write your question or comment in the chat feature, or when public comments open, Tara will unmute all members of the public and you may verbally state your name and indicate that you have a question. Kathy Martin will time each public comment and will advise you when your 3 minutes is up. Then your mic will be muted after a brief pause. Public comments can also be sent via email or mail. The agenda has all the specifics on that, and public comments received via email or writing after 2:30 p.m. today will be posted to the website the next day and become part of the record. For each individual agenda item, I will introduce that item and the presenter. At the end of the presentation, I will ask the committee for any questions of the presenter. Members are asked to use the raise hand feature or otherwise signal verbally or visually that they wish to speak. Please wait to be called upon. I will then ask for public comments. The committee may then discuss the item in public comments. Again, please use the raise hand feature and wait to be recognized before speaking. Today's PowerPoint was not in the packet, but it will be shown during this meeting and will be available on the SCVGSA website. And now for roll, over to you, Tara.
Unmute myself first, and Dan Masnada.
Present.
Sandra Cattell. Sandra? Okay, nothing so far. Stacy Fortner.
Present.
Dennis Ostrom.
Here.
Steve Sly.
Here.
Matt Carpenter.
Here.
Eric Adair. Eric?
Eric is in the chat and said he's
here but briefly tied up. Got it. Holly Schroeder.
here.
Sorry, I have like a list in front of me so I don't miss anyone. All right.
That's everybody?
That's everybody.
Okay, great. We will then go on to public comment and follow the procedure that I just outlined. Do we have anyone who wishes to make public comment? Please indicate by using the chat feature or otherwise indicating, or we will now unmute.
Everyone is unmuted. Anyone with questions? Comments? Ideas? Nope. No public comment.
Okay, then we will move on to approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was on May 19th. If you hopefully had a chance to take a look, and if so, I would welcome a motion or any comments or alterations that might be necessary. This means one of you guys unmute. Maybe you're reviewing. Maybe you're reviewing right now.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Dan.
I'll second.
Thank you, Stacy. Are there any changes needed? Corrections? If not, Tara, it's your show.
All right. Roll call vote. Dan Masnada.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Sandra Cattell, we're voting. Sandra, we're voting on the minutes. I just saw you entered. Are you a yay or a nay on the minutes? All right, I'll come back to her. Stacy.
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Eric. Text. Nothing yet. We'll see if he comes back. Holly.
Yes,
Great.
should go back to Sandra. She may
Yeah.
have not had her audio connected yet.
Sandra, we're voting on minutes. Is that a yay or a nay from you?
Yes.
Perfect. And Eric, can you just put in the chat window yes or no?
Says was briefly tied up, so let's call him a
All right,
abstention for the moment.
sounds great.
Or not present for the moment. Okay, item 3.2. Tara, this is going to be over to you to present summary of the workshop that was held on June 2nd.
Fantastic. Presenting. So this was the Projects and Management Actions Workshop. It was on June 2nd. We had 34 total participants. 11 of those were the public. We had feedback from 2 individuals, and it was basically 2 comments. There was a little bit of a conversation, but really definitively kind of 2 comments. You'll see those later. Feedback, there were no forms submitted. The 2 comments are that Stacy continues to raise the red flag, that the threshold levels are low. There was a couple questions on how quickly could we make those changes, and if there's suddenly a trigger, how quickly can we make the change? And then the other question was, how does water input at the old Castaic school in the north constitute adding water on the east side? So those 2 questions were asked. They were answered satisfactorily to the individuals. Stacy made her point very clear, which you'll see in the plan feedback. There was no presentation feedback, but general plan feedback included. I appreciate that because I'm going to keep raising the belief that she believes that the water levels are set too low. So that is the current feedback on the plan. A reminder on how we address feedback. So general feedback is taken into consideration by the committee and the board of directors. So I will be reporting this feedback to the board at the next board meeting, along with all the other comments that we've had recently. And then in addition to that, specific comments are addressed directly. For example, we did have the wrong GDE map in the presentation. And so we corrected and reposted that immediately following the meeting so that the current presentation that is up is the corrected version. And that's it, because only 2 people asked questions. So any other questions, comments on this particular part of the meeting today? Yes, Dan.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. In regards to I know Stacy's mentioned this a couple of times, in regards to the triggers being set too low, first of all, I think the committee's made the correct decision as far as its recommendation to the GSA board. But, I want to provide, at least from my perspective, why the triggers and the thresholds are appropriate, and actually revising them really wouldn't be advisable, really wouldn't even be beneficial. 3 points I want to make. First of all, the basis for the thresholds and the triggers were made by modeling and technical analysis. Raising them, whether it's 2 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, is really arbitrary, and there's really no technical basis for that. The only thing that I could equate it to would be, use of a factor of safety in engineering. You design a bridge, you design it for a certain loading. Factors of safety are imposed because are applied to that design over and above what the calculations would indicate is appropriate for the loading. But what you're trying to do there is avoid a catastrophic situation. You don't want the bridge falling down. In this situation, you don't have, there's no real catastrophic failure. Um, you don't need to set an arbitrary level higher than what is being technically recommended, because in fact, the safety factor, to use a term, would be additional water monitoring, shooting of levels in the wells. The condition changes gradually as far as further depletion of the groundwater. Once again, you don't really need to put an arbitrary factor of safety on it. Second of all, there's a cost associated with that. There's a physical cost, there's a financial cost, there's even an environmental cost, indirect with respect to the the plan itself, but direct as far as the agency's water supply portfolio. The physical cost would be having to back off on groundwater production or extractions prematurely, in a certain sense, leaving water in the ground that could be utilized that year. So that reduces the amount of groundwater that would be available, and has been, there's a proven track record there as far as the operating yield of the groundwater basin. Staff and consultants can correct me if I'm wrong there, but certainly in certain years that would result in reduced groundwater extractions. It could even affect the yield of the groundwater basin. How material, I'm not sure. And then from a cost standpoint, well, in order to make up any reductions in groundwater supply, as staff and the consultants have mentioned, it would require imported water or water from the banking programs, which is more expensive than groundwater. So ultimately, there's a financial impact associated with that. And then the environmental impact, as far as adjusting the triggers and the GDE action trigger. First of all, the benefit of the plan is the fact that they are being established. This is something new. There are groundwater triggers being established, and so hopefully we're better protecting the GDEs. But secondly, from a broader perspective, for those of you that have been listening into the Urban Water Management Plan presentations and the Water Shortage Contingency Plan, one of the goals of the agency, or of all agencies in the state, is to reduce dependence on Delta supplies. By arbitrarily raising the limits, that would result in additional exportation of water from the Delta and the environmental consequences and impacts of that. So bottom line is, if you look at the representation on our committee, there's no one stakeholder, none of the stakeholders really receive a benefit by raising the limits from what's being recommended by staff and the consultants. And I know this is kind of water under the bridge, no pun intended, I guess, but to reinforce the notion to the committee that the recommendation that it's making is a very good and sound one. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any other questions on my presentation?
I just have a question that Dan just raised. This is Stacy. What I'm not clear on is if the modeling that we used for this included the fact that the well levels rose when the wells were shut off. I mean, I don't know if that information was included in the model at all. So I think I mentioned this on one of our previous meetings. I did a screen share where I showed the wells that were turned off, those well levels rose dramatically. And I don't know if that was included in the modeling or not.
All right, I will make sure that you get an answer as to whether or not it was included in the modeling.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I would say to respond to Dan is that having die off in those areas is pretty catastrophic, in my opinion. And that's it. That's
Okay,
it. Thanks.
thank you.
Can you repeat that last thing you cut out on my audio?
Oh, I just said that having die off of the ecosystem in those areas is pretty catastrophic, in my opinion.
Thanks.
And with that, oh, Sandra has her hand raised. Sorry. I stopped sharing, so now I can see everyone. Sandra?
Tara, can you hear me? I'm having trouble with my computer. Tara, can you hear me?
I can now.
Oh, good. I would just like to mention again, the format in which the information for the meeting was sent out was really not terribly user-friendly. And if our goal is to encourage the public to attend these meetings, I would have recommended something much more simpler than the flyer, just mentioning what the meeting was about and why it was important, and then have the link to the flyer with more information. I think it would have been an easier lift for those of us who are on the advisory committee to encourage others to attend.
So there is a version of the flyer that is only the information and then the link is separate. So we can send that version to you. That's the version that we use for digital advertisements because obviously you can kind of click the link. We wanted to make sure that you had all the information if you were forwarding it along. And of course, the link is an important piece because I don't want to let people know that there's a meeting and then not have them find it. So if
Hold on, not just the information that there's a meeting, but that it's public input time on a specific topic. And, why is this important? And for more information and how to register, here is the link. That's kind of what I would have liked to have seen so that I then could have forwarded that package to people in the environmental community and encouraged them to come. A couple people looked at the flyer and they said, oh, that's just a whole bunch of technical stuff. I don't need that.
Okay, so just so you know, there's no registration required. So, but what I can do is send you something that maybe talks about the overall process.
I don't need that now. The meeting is over.
But
I'm
there's
just-
another meeting coming up. So I want to make sure that we adjust for the next meeting.
So why don't you and I talk offline about some possible things to do? Is that possible?
You're absolutely welcome to contact me anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have seen, we had in our first few meetings, we had a lot of folks and we've seen less of that. I don't know if that's, Zoom fatigue, meeting fatigue, but I don't know whether any of the format of our flyers have changed or our advertising has changed at all. So yeah, I think it's something, especially as we come into the home stretch where we're looking at the whole plan as a collective document, which to me is the most meaningful. The putting together of the parts. I think we have to be attentive to how we're wording that. And maybe that's something that as we prepare for that, as we move into later summer, that we do take a look at as a committee about that, just to make sure that, just like we did with our earliest presentations, we sort of made sure that they were in English, so to speak, in lay terms, and we might want to just revisit that a bit as we come down the looking more at the collective assembly of chapters.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate that feedback. And we have not changed how we send out the information. We do actually place advertisements in the Signal, both in print and digital formats. And then we also do a social media push and we send it out to the e-blast to anyone who, via e-blast to anyone who signed up on our interest list in addition. Now, I know originally we talked about delivering flyers to local areas, but that kind of with COVID, that became a non-starter. So for this last stretch, that may be something we consider doing, since now things are opening back up.
And
But
if somebody attended one of the early workshops, do they automatically get on that list? I
Yep.
would guess.
so, I mean, I don't
So-
have their, I don't necessarily capture their contact information, but they had to find out about it some way. So
But does that add them to future notifications?
it does not, because it's an anonymous joining. So I don't want to find out exactly who you are and your phone number and your contact information, because it makes people not want to go. But I encourage them to sign
Okay.
up for our interest list online.
So then I think then we ought to, like at the end of each remaining workshop, we ought to make sure that we say, here's how you sign up to make sure you're notified for everything going forward.
Right. And
I don't know if we say that explicitly. I know it's in
Yeah.
the documents, but I think we might want to call that out on a slide or, and refer them to the website or something to that effect.
especially with this, I think this is actually the last meeting, so I don't know that we can do that, but what we can do is really make an effort with this last one to try to get the word out as much as possible, and really rely on our stakeholder advisory committee to also send it out to all of their contacts, not just the environmental ones, as much as I love Sandra sending it to her group of friends.
Yep, everybody should play a role. That is why we are advising on stakeholders. All right. With that, other comments, reflections, observations from the workshop on June 2nd? Okay, then we'll go on to item 3.3. Rick, I'm going to turn this over to you. And I believe this was something we requested to hear a little bit more about at I think our last meeting, maybe the previous meeting, which was about the model peer review process and how that's working. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Schroeder. And yes, you're right. We put this item together following interest from the last meeting, and what we've done today is we've asked the technical leads for the peer review, Jacobs Engineering, to provide a presentation. BJ Leckler is here from Jacobs, as is Nate Brown from Jacobs, and they've got a relatively short presentation to go over that talks about the peer review. And with that, I'll turn it over to BJ Leckler and Nate Brown.
Thanks, Rick. Good afternoon, committee members and other attendees. I'm BJ Leckler. I'm a hydrogeologist with Jacobs, and I'm the project manager for the peer review of SCV's groundwater model that's being used to support development of the GSP. So what we'd like to do here is just provide a summary of the peer review process and then an update on the status of the project. Next slide, please. Nate, can you advance this slide?
It is on the next slide on my screen. Is that not on your screen?
Oh, there it is. Thank you. So what are the elements of a peer review? A peer review is an independent evaluation by experts in the same field as those producing that work. And it involves getting feedback on the inputs, assumptions, the methodology, and the results surrounding those work products. And so what's the reason for conducting a peer review? It benefits the overall work product by providing a fresh perspective from individuals other than those that are completing the work, and it'll provide an independent assessment of the validity of the work product for its intended use. Next slide. So SCV Water has a number of different tasks associated with their grant with DWR for preparation of the GSP. And one of those components includes conducting an expert peer review of the critical components of the groundwater flow model. And that review has included reviewing the calibration of the model and refinement of the model for the GSP, reviewing the model's quantification of groundwater and surface water exchange, reviewing the suitability of the model for informing minimum thresholds and measurable objectives outlined in the GSP. As part of the process, we've held 3 workshops between the peer review members and the groundwater modeling team. The peer review group has made some recommendations for incremental improvements that could be made to the model during development of the GSP, as well as some improvements that may be made during implementation of the GSP. And then finally, what we're working on right now is developing a report that will describe the peer review process, work and the findings, and the appropriateness of the model for supporting development of the GSP. So the expert review panel, or ERP, members that we've convened for this review include Dr. Jason Sun with United Water Conservation District. He's a reviewer from the downstream basin. Mr. Jim Rumbaugh with Environmental Simulations. He's an independent reviewer, an expert in groundwater modeling, as well as a developer of a widely used software interface for ModFlow, which is the modeling platform that's used for the GSP model. And then my colleague, Nate Brown with Jacobs. He's an additional independent reviewer, also an expert in the field of groundwater modeling. And he's been tasked to lead the peer review process. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Nate, and he can provide a little bit more detail on what the peer review has included, some of the findings of the peer review, as well as provide an update on the status of the project.
Thanks, BJ. Yeah, moving on to slide 5 here, just a quick organization chart. As you mentioned, SCV Water assembled this expert review panel. The entities listed here. I've been assigned to kind of lead and organize the ERP on their behalf. And so again, I'm with Jacobs, and Jim Rumbaugh is with the SI, and Jason Sun is with United. And in terms of the overall communication flow, as shown here, kind of these arrows, the ERP, we freely, spoke amongst ourselves on the various things that we reviewed. And along the way, we were given, full access to GSI, John Portello, the primary developer of the model. So we appreciated that. So there was really good open communication to get through this review process. Here. So moving on to slide 6, just first off, maybe just give a quick overview of the software being used for this latest version of the model. ModFlow USG is the code that is being used. Think of this as kind of the calculation engine behind the model. So this is what's actually solving the flow equations. This is a free version of ModFlow in the public domain. It's a modern version of this code. ModFlow has been around for several decades, and it's very much in wide use and well documented. And this latest version has been benchmarked and verified and has gone through all those steps it needs to do to be accepted into the scientific community. So it's a good code. I use this code myself on a number of sites. And here's the website here if you're interested in learning more. And then it's pretty common these days that folks will use graphical user interfaces to kind of help pre-process, post-process, manage files, manage the simulations. And Groundwater Vistas is being used for that purpose, version 7. As BJ mentioned, one of our reviewers, Jim Rumbaugh, he and his brother basically wrote. Yeah, they developed Groundwater Vistas. It's really well documented. A lot of folks use it as well. Good technical support. This one is not free, but is commercially available for purchase. So there's a website here if you're interested in learning more. So these are the 2 primary pieces of software that drive the Santa Clarita Valley groundwater model. terms of the review itself, we were asked specifically to look at these 3 documents. So shown here is a draft, a revised version of the draft for the numerical groundwater flow model report. That was done last fall. Next was the water budget development report completed in October of last year. And then more recently in February, the draft sustainable management criteria section. So those are the 3 specific documents that we were asked to review. Just an overview of the overall process here. As I mentioned, those 3 reports, we would review those and then host meetings to discuss our comments verbally. This would be prior to any written comments being provided. So we would get together with GSI and discuss our preliminary comments and our proposed revisions, get some clarification on some things, discuss some potential modifications to the model, and also whether some of the comments being made, whether they should be addressed now. Do they need to be addressed now, or could they be addressed later during GSP implementation, or at all? In some cases, it was just a good forum for kind of clarifying thoughts on what we had been reviewing. So we held 3 of those meetings. After each review, we would then follow up with written comments. We provide those to SCV Water and GSI. And then written responses to those comments were provided by GSI. And in those, I have some examples I'll show here in a minute, but they provided some indication of how the comment would be addressed. And then finally, prepare a peer review summary report. And so in that, we'll talk about our key work, findings, and appropriateness of the model for its intended use. So that's kind of laying out the overall process. To give you a feel for the nature of the comments, there is, I'd say, yeah, a good 70% of the comments had to do more with just getting some additional information and some clarification on what we were reading. So in other words, not like it's fatal flaws. It's just, I think I understand what I'm reading, but I need a little more information to make sure I understand what I'm reading. So that was the bulk of the comments. And then the remaining comments, those were focused more on things that we felt could improve the model, defensibility, or improve the reporting from a SGMA compliance, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act compliance perspective. And so in total, of the 3 reports, we provided around 100 comments on the flow model. I think there was around 50 or so on the water budget report and around 40 on the sustainable management criteria section. So provided several dozen, almost 200 comments. So what I want to show here on this slide is just each row is going to be an example from each of the reports that we looked at, just to give you a feel for some of the things that we had commented on. So this first row, here's a comment, the model underestimates some vertical hydraulic gradients at some Saugus wells. Do you think this is a serious limitation from a GSP perspective? And it'd be good to check and see if there's other areas where vertical head difference could be looked at. So the response, they pointed out that they felt of the vertical gradients that were shown, one of them actually looked pretty reasonably well simulated, but they agreed that the other 3 maybe didn't look as well, but they didn't see this as a limitation from a GSP perspective. They mentioned here that the purpose of those was really to more evaluate how the model simulates trends over time. And then that both the figures show a good match to those temporal trends, but that they would look over the text and make sure to discuss these points. So that's just an example on the groundwater modeling report. From the water budget report, here's a comment, how reliable will imported sources of water be in the future? There's no discussion of the uncertainty associated with that, and this will be an important thing to characterize as part of the sustainability plan. And so the response pointed to a few documents here, the SCV Water 2021 report, the draft reliability report, as well as the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan. Just indicated that they've looked at a number of simulations here and as documented in these reports, it would indicate there's full reliability under those assumptions in those respective plans. Even with a significant reduction in the state water project reliability, the operating plan, could be performed. And so as long as there's active conservation, the remaining supply capacities in the Saugus Formation and the water banks, as long as they're fully developed. So I'd say they're pretty thoughtful responses on that, but that's an example from the water budget report. And then the last example here, this one's from the Sustainable Management Criteria section of the GSP. By the way, these were all draft versions of the reports. A reviewer had noted that one of the monitoring wells that was proposed to be part of the representative monitoring network for the GSP in 2013 through 19, basically since the recent drought, that well's been dry. And we noted that there was some hydrographs in the appendix that show water levels. And we were just mentioning that those are not representative of what's going on in the aquifer because they're dry. And we were recommending a different well to be used. And so response was that they had agreed and had planned to drop the well anyway for other reasons. But we're not aware of other wells in that part of the basin. So again, I guess just want to kind of give you a sense of some of the detail types of the questions, but also as a reviewer of a lot of things and being part of this panel, I appreciated that they took the comments seriously. As you can see in the responses, they provided pretty detailed responses, and it felt like a good collaborative process. So last slide here, what's the status? So we're on track to complete our scope of work this summer, and all the comments and responses were completed a couple weeks ago, basically in May. And GSI is in the process of incorporating our comments into the 3 review documents. They've also have made a number of modifications in the model in response to some of those comments. And the ERP members, the 3 of us, based on the responses that we've received and what we have seen, we feel it is an appropriate tool to support the GSA in developing its GSP. It's being used specifically to develop water budgets. Under Sigma, you have to develop historical, current, and future water budgets with climate change, and they've certainly done that. And it's being used to guide decisions regarding sustainable management criteria. I mean, it's the best tool available to do that. And then the other thing I'll just note is, this is not a new model that was developed recently. This is basically the evolution of work over the last couple of decades. It certainly has been updated to different software platforms over the years, but this tool has been in use for over 20 years. And so, I believe it's an appropriate tool for its intended uses. So to finish up, the next step is we need to prepare our peer review summary report to describe the findings and the suitability of its intended use. And we're looking to submit the draft later this month or early next month, basically. And that is it. Any questions?
Hey, Nate,
Yes.
this is John Porcello. I actually just wanted to mention something on that line. You mentioned the product of 20 plus years of development and use in the Valley. And, recently we've, not only just moved into newer software tools and all that, but one of the important things we've also done, and this gets to a question, Stacy, you asked a little earlier in this meeting. We keep extending the timeline on the model calibration. So when the model was first developed about, nearly 20 years ago, we had about 20 years worth of, detailed records about water levels, stream flows, pumping, and other hydrologic processes to work with, rainfall, those kinds of things in terms of a really comprehensive data set. And as time goes on, of course, more and more data gets collected, again, covering all these various hydrologic processes in the basin. And so, every few years we've gone and extended that model timeline and checked the model's calibration with that new data. And so, for example, in this recent version of the model we developed to support the GSP, one of the things we have looked at is the water level fluctuations that occurred during that really dry period from about 2012 or 13 through 2016, and also the recovery of water levels that began starting in about late 2016, which was a combination of starting to get some rainfall and stream flow periodically in the basin. And the purveyors were also, backing off somewhat on their use of the alluvial aquifer. So the model, we've gone and checked that it actually does simulate some of those water level recoveries that, you've been noticing in some of the reports you've been looking at. So I just wanted to address your question about that, kind of in the context of what we typically do in modeling and what we've been doing for this project. And, the peer reviewers have looked at all that material as well as part of their work. So I hope that helps answer some of your questions.
Thank you, John. Chair Schroeder, I think we were moving into questions.
Yeah, so I was getting my mute. Are there questions? And I guess okay, go ahead, Stacy. I'll let you go. Maybe it'll answer my question.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Porcello. I seem to recall a report in 2015-ish that said that there wasn't going to be enough water available as what they thought they had. And I seem to recall some numbers around 25,000 acre feet. And I'm just not sure if that was incorporated into the model. And then I don't know if you answered my question completely from before. And if you did, I apologize if I missed it. If those well levels that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, if that was incorporated in the model.
Yeah.
Is the peer review aware of those reports and of those well levels?
Well,
reviewers, I guess I meant to say peer reviewers.
So in terms of have the water levels been incorporated in the model, the answer is basically yes. But now what the model actually does, and we try to get it to do, is to actually simulate those water levels. We don't force it and tell it has to be this water level or that water level. The input that goes into the model is the pumping, the rainfall infiltration from streams, those kinds of processes go into the model. And then the model calculates what it thinks the groundwater levels should be. And if we have a well-calibrated model, it's a model that replicates those types of water level fluctuations that we see historically, both, the declines during dry period and the rising water levels during periods of wetter conditions and or reduced pumping. And the model does simulate all that. I'm sorry, I forgot the first part of your question. Oh, it was about the work from back in 2015. That's right. So that work, it was actually, I think, late 2014. We were looking ahead to the conditions in 2015 and asking ourselves if focusing just on, we're looking at the entire aquifer. All of the water users. We were really focused primarily on the 3 retail water divisions in that memo. And so the numbers that you see there are going to be different than what the numbers in the operating plan are, because the operating plan includes all users of the alluvial aquifer, not just those 3 we look at. So got to be kind of careful comparing one set of numbers to another. But basically, what they ended up pumping at that time, was very similar to what we expected they would be doing from that late 2014 analysis. One of the things too about that late 2014 analysis was that there were certain wells that the water levels were high enough that they could have actually been pumping them harder than they planned. But there were just other reasons that they didn't do that. I think mostly operational in nature. So, from all that work, yeah, we gave them estimates of what they thought they could do. They were within the range of the operating plan. And those estimates at that time proved to be what worked for them in 2015.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good.
Other questions? I guess my question is, sorry, it's a helicopter above, is when you showed the, the comments and the response, this has been happening on a timeline that's, sort of concurrent or at the, more recent months of the work of this committee. So when you make a comment like this well was dry and they said, well, we're going to remove that well from the network, and now there's, there's not really another representative well and some of those others. I mean, how do we know as a committee that whether or not any of the changes or adjustments are substantive? But I guess maybe you can just speak to that. Are they substantive? I certainly get some of them that are saying, yeah, we can explain that better. And those that clearly are less so. So can you speak maybe a little bit to that, to whether there are any areas that sort of raised flags about whether or not what was presented to us has meaningfully changed that we need to get maybe a deeper briefing on, or is it more of the clarification, elaboration types of adjustments in the discussion?
A good question. I would say the latter. You're right in the timing of the way things are going here. I think John is probably frantically, he looks pretty tired to me. He's probably frantically trying to update these 3 documents in the modeling right now. Like the rest of us, I'm touching three GSPs as well. So yeah, I think from what I have seen in the responses that were provided to our comments, again, it looks like those comments were taken seriously. In some cases, the comments, sometimes it's just simply good point. We will, make that clearer in the text. In other cases, good comment. I'm gonna adjust the hydraulic connectivity over here. It's very specific technical things in the model. So it's a variety of things. But I would say, based on the responses that I've seen, there has been no red flags, I would say, based on what we have seen in terms of how they're handling the comments.
Okay. I mean, I think that as you guys are, in the last bullet here on the slide on the screen is, as you're preparing that final, I mean, I guess that would just be my comment, would be to sort of step back and look at it from that point of view. And just since, this, Rick has the slide that I love, which is sort of shows the stair steps of building the plan. And I just, if you change anything too much on a low stair step, you create something that's unstable. And I want to make sure that we didn't, that there's nothing that happened there. And so maybe you could just ask the peer review team as you're putting together that final summary report to take that step back, say, is there anything here that is changed in any way that we need to tell this committee about it, so we sort of understand what the cascade of relationships are. It doesn't sound like you see that off the top of your head, but I would just maybe ask that you guys think about that for in a meaningful way as you put together the final report.
Yeah, great feedback. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
do that.
Holly, maybe I could add just a bit too, is that, as the person who receives and processes it and all the comments and thinks about what are we going to do with them and what do we need to do, if anything, to the model. I think Nate characterized it well, is that, there were just some small ways you might simulate something different in one part of the model or in another part of the model. There were not big wholesale changes in, broad approach, specific technical approaches, or handling of a certain part of the building here or somewhere else, that they felt there was a need to really go back and take a look at. So we made a few small changes here and there in the model that, are little small scale improvements, but we didn't need to go do wholesale, large scale revisions to that code. Regarding that one well, too, you asked about that AL-12A. That's an interesting well because it's a non-pumping observation well, and it's a well that's shallower than what the production wells typically are, as I understand it, over in that area. So I think that's one reason we're just not seeing water in that well, for that period of time, is because it's pretty shallow.
John, this is Jeff. I just wanted to also add something to answer Holly's question. As I looked at for myself, as John was working with the peer review team, I was obviously concerned about whether the changes to the model might result in changes to the water budget, changes to the sustainable management criteria, minimum thresholds, any of that kind of thing. And to my knowledge, none of those changes to the model improvements resulted in any changes, any substantial changes anyway, as far as what those numbers were presented in the water budget, or also what the elevations are or the trends that were presented for developing the sustainable management criteria, which were obviously key things that this committee was concerned about.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, Chair Schroeder, that we will make sure that when we release the final report from the peer review and in future presentations to your committee, we'll talk about when and where some of these minor adjustments were made, and whether or not they moved the needle on the work. And I think what you're hearing is they've been pretty minor, but we will be more explicit when we talk in the future about it, just so everybody's clear on where the modifications were made and what the results were.
Thank you for that. I had one more question, and maybe I can also just check. I see Stacy wrote a question about whether we were going to get another presentation from the whole peer review panel. I don't think so, because I think Jacobs was tasked with leading, right, the effort there. And so to that end, maybe I'd ask a question of Nate. Is Jacobs also doing other peer reviews as part? I mean, obviously there's places all over the state that are doing this planning process. Is there other peer reviews that you guys have been engaged in, or maybe this also is for Rick or Jeff, is, comparatively, the things that we're doing, I mean, is it, what we're doing very consistent? I know every aquifer is different, but, is there anything that, what we're doing would look out of step or out of, somewhere different, distinct from what's happening in other regions that we should be alerted to?
This in terms of formal reviews, this is the only one that I'm involved with on a formal review basis. I'm preparing GSPs for a couple other entities, supporting one and two of them in Northern California and another one in Southern California. So there's a lot of, through that networking, there's a lot of comparing of notes, if you will, with other consultants, because I think all of us are looking at this new legislation and trying to navigate this thing to get these first rounds of GSPs out. So that said, I would say that if there were anything that came up as something that we would think is, you might want to check with your DWR rep on this aspect. I mean, we commented as such, and I think they have followed through and looked into it. There was no, I'd say some of the things like there's sustainability indicators, there's 6 of them. There were some things on groundwater surface water interaction that looked different initially, just the way it was being handled with triggers and GDEs. And so we commented on that. But as I say, I think in response to that, based on the responses that we received, I think, John, you pretty significantly have rewritten that section in response to that. So I would say if there was anything that looked like, ooh, you might want to check with your DWR rep, or any perception of any shortcoming or risk for non-compliance, the comments are there and their responses indicate they took the comment really seriously and they've made some adjustments to change it. So that, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's right. I understand that everybody in the state is, working through brand new legislation and process here. So we're breaking some new ground, and it's good to hear that communication is alive and well.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd say, your analogy with the stair step thing is an interesting one. The other thing that, and I'm constantly needing to remind myself, and I know consultants working with GSAs are constantly needing to remind folks as well, that this GSP thing, nobody's gonna get everything 100% right with the first GSPs that go out. And DWR knew that when they put this thing out. They're giving entities 20 years to basically make adjustments to their groundwater sustainability plan. So that's the other thing to look at here. I think there's no question in my mind that it's the right tool to use to support this. And every model ever made, every groundwater model ever made can be improved. They're never done because nature keeps going. And so that's the other way I'd look at it. So in terms of just anxiety of, God, did we get everything right? Thankfully, DWR recognizes this is a really complicated problem, and they will certainly let folks know if they perceive there to be deficiencies or things that should be shored up or improved. So that gives me some comfort with the GSPs I'm working on. I just would offer that too of, if there are some things that need to be tied up, there's time. They've provided timetables to do that. So for what it's worth.
Right.
Chair Schreiber, I might even add, I've served on, I think it's now 3 expert panels in other locations, 2 up in Washington State, 1 in California. And when I think back, in fact, Jim Rumbaugh has served on a couple of those with me. He's one of the other for this. And when I think back on the types of things we've commented on about other models, they've tended to involve things like really rethink how you discretize time in your model. Maybe you're not changing those hydrologic variables often enough. That's a comment we have on a model Jim and I are looking at right now up in Washington State. In another case, this was another Washington model. One of the big conclusions was that they had, put the model boundaries, in the middle of the aquifer because they had to. It was kind of a site scale model in a much, much larger regional system. But for the kinds of technical analyses and interpretations and uses of those models they were doing, they had the boundaries just too close to where they had some pumping wells. And that was creating numerical effects in the solutions and the output and affecting the interpretations. And in another place, we concluded that the way that they were interpreting well tests and using those to estimate how permeable the aquifer is really needed to be looked at in one part of the basin. We haven't really had any of that, in these comments that we've received on this model. And so I think, like we've said earlier, it's really been about, making small little changes here, and here, but not kind of big changes that can impact the solutions and the output that you're getting, where you care about it the most and or on a model-wide basis.
Great, thanks. It looks like Eric has a question.
Yeah, this is Dennis Ostrom. And I wanted to follow up on our previous discussions about subsidence. And I was a little bit disappointed from what I heard last time that even though they measured subsidence, or I don't remember, USGS or some satellite company, they measure it every other week, but they only, take the data and go over it and come up with subsidences on an annual basis. Couple of questions with some of these, the peer people. Is subsidence, can you correlate subsidence to, I imagine from the extraction and maybe, the entering of the water, it may go up and down, but over the long-term performance of the groundwater reservoir body with or without the water. My concern is that the well levels and everything like that, they can be taken care of by the weather. But if you lose this capacity to contain and give back water, you've kind of lost a very the most significant thing. So and then I've been thinking about what are you actually measuring with subsidence. This can go a whole bunch of ways. I know seismically, we're in kind of a compression zone. We're in the dogleg region of the San Andreas Fault, and the mountains are moving up, and so it's kind of a compression zone, and so there are stresses, and when you have stresses present and you exceed or you lubricate or you exceed them, then it collapses, it gets smaller. The satellite.
So I'm going to stop you there, Dennis, and see if Nate or John or Rick can maybe talk about what are you measuring, and just sort of respond to some of Dennis's initial comments there. And
okay. Thank you, Chair Schroeder. I wonder if well, there's a couple things going on, and yes, Mr. Ostrom, you're absolutely right about the tectonic forces taking place in the valley. And I wondered if your question to the peer reviewing team was whether or not let me take a step back. We haven't used the flow model that the peer review team worked on to evaluate subsidence. Instead, we've relied on actual ground surface elevations over the years in the valley, and also the INSAR data. So I think that may answer your question. And Nate and John, if you think there's something else we can clarify, please chime in.
I'll defer to John Portello on that.
Well, you're correct. We're not using the model with that. We actually have other people working on that piece of the GSP. I've not really been that involved in that. Jeff might be.
I'll jump in a little bit on this. Mr. Ostrom, you're right that subsidence is an important issue we've taken very seriously. You mentioned that the INSAR data is only going to be available to us retrospectively, once a year. So our monitoring plan includes establishing a number of benchmark stations coincident with what the LA County has been monitoring, and we're going to be monitoring those elevations of land surface once a year rather than every 5 to 6 years that LA County is doing. If we start to see some concerns, especially if we see water levels dropping more in the basin, we can obviously increase the frequency by which we're doing that monitoring to see if there's any concern happening. So in our revised HCM document that's going to be presented in the draft GSP. You're going to see an updated discussion of subsidence in there. You're also going to see the monitoring program that we're proposing in the monitoring plan itself that goes with the GSP.
And Jeff, I'd like to add too, Mr. Ostrom, we looked at the resolution or the precision from the satellite data. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the land surface elevation precision we have is better than what the satellite data can provide. And so the satellite data will be useful, but the actual land surface elevation is better for what we need to do to track this.
Well, what you're getting at is the relativeness of the local measurements you're taking. I don't know which measurements you're taking, but I'm assuming that if you can get the data that fast, it's relative. What you're doing is measuring the relative elevation or distances between 2 points, because you don't know where these points are really moving, because they're in a big body of geologic material. I mean, the whole world wobbles, I guess, and I'm sure the satellites pick that up. But I think that we have to really understand what's going on around the material that holds the water, and what part of that material we're measuring, and how that correlates. I understand in the Central Valley they get a very nice correlation with the extraction of water. Too bad we can't refill it and see if it comes back up. I think I would like to hear from the peers their understanding of the cycle of taking water out and then water going back in. If there is some subsidence going on, is it a ratcheting thing? Is it a one-way thing? Or plastic? Is it elastic? What? I mean, I know this is pretty complicated.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I think I'd like Nate to do his best to sort of respond to that, but then I think we
Sure.
also might need to know if we're going, are we going outside our scope? I
Well,
feel a little bit like we're into tectonic plates. Maybe you can just speak to it about what we can know and what we can do, where anything we could do would be material, whether that's monitoring or something else. Obviously trying to understand it, but there's a lot of, big movement, I guess, or big pieces of things that can move.
Yeah, the only thing I would offer is, through the Sigma lens, at least for the types of things that these guys have to plan around, the legislation is specific. It would have to be that, let me back up. There's a lot of things that can cause land subsidence. And as you pointed out, some of it's elastic and some of it's inelastic. The inelastic you don't get back. And through Sigma, the way it is very carefully written that the only thing that they're interested in from a Sigma perspective is the inelastic, the reduction of the land surface solely due to groundwater pumping.
absolutely.
Right. So, there can be subsidence that occurs because of natural gas wells and other, decomposition of certain materials. There's things that can cause it that have nothing to do with groundwater management. And so they're pretty clear that what these guys are going to be looking at through the GSPs is just that which can be attributed to any kind of management activity associated with their water supply. So the inelastic stuff, if you re-inject or do any kind of recharge, again, inelastic, you don't get back. So the way to avoid that is to not overstress your aquifers to begin with. and the plans that they're putting together, they include long drought cycles. They're looking at, I think, the right things to what kinds of things would create stresses, and what would push water levels to historical lows. Those are the kinds of things they're thinking about with the simulations. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. So, I mean, I think these things are on their mind. They're looking at them. But at the same time, I think this basin, yeah, they're using the INSAR data. They're following the regulations and looking at it. And yeah, I'm not sure I have anything else to offer there.
That's good. Eric, you raised your hand earlier. Do you still have a comment, question?
Yeah, this goes back to something that Nate Brown said earlier, talking about the GWR approval process. Just an update, I noticed that last week, I think it was Thursday, DWR reported on the website that they reviewed the first 4 of the GSPs submitted from the initial group of respondents. 2 were approved, 2 were conditionally disapproved, and the submitters were told what they needed to do to correct their submissions. So there's some interesting information that we can glean from those submissions and the responses from DWR about what it takes to get the GSP approved.
Thanks, Eric. And I will assume that staff is reviewing, or if not, will be after tonight. So are there any other questions from the committee? Dan, thanks. It's hard to see that hand raising.
No problem. Going back to the issue of subsidence real quickly, the good news is, unlike the Central Valley that's been in significant overdraft since the 60s, that's why they've had subsidence up to 30 feet in certain areas. Locally, we've had groundwater extractions that have even exceeded what is currently, what the valley's currently experienced. But the main thing is, by staying within the operating criteria, we have avoided subsidence, and we will continue to avoid subsidence. If I remember correctly, Richard Slade explained to us one time how the nature of the geology is such that subsidence wouldn't be as big a concern, geologically speaking, if I remember correctly, as it is in the Central Valley because of the nature of the geology, intermittent layers of clays and sandstone. But in any event, the main thing is that the agency will be monitoring the subsidence, and I guess even more important than that, as long as pumping remains within the operating plan, it won't be an issue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Dan. With that, Tara, maybe we can move out of the screen show. I'm not sure whose screen that is, but we can get back to our gallery view. There we go. Tara, let us see if there's anybody who has public comment at this time.
All right, is there any public comment? I'm asking all to unmute, so you have the ability to do so. I don't see anything besides committee comments in the chat that have already been addressed. So anyone, anywhere? That is no public comment.
Okay, then therefore no committee discussion of public comment. But Tara, maybe you can speak if you're able to, and if not, maybe we follow up on this. But I know Sandra asked about if we see the whole document. I think we don't see like red line comments, but we will have there is a public process for the collective document where we see all the pieces come together into the beauteous package. So I think that's when we really get to see changes, adaptations that have evolved from our comments, from public comments, from this peer review process, et cetera. Is that a correct statement?
That is, and it also includes the public comment. So you'll be able to see what comments were made and then also see the document in its entirety.
If I said Sandra, I meant Stacy, I apologize.
That's
Um,
okay.
Sorry. Okay, then with that, that concludes item 3.3. Item 4 is about if there's any specific requests for other future agenda items. And then if not, then Tara, can you, just as we prepare for adjournment, can you sort of describe our next couple of steps here? Oh, wait, Sandra, now I get that S, Sandra.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
We can, and we can see you. Hi.
Oh my goodness. Hi there. I'm having trouble with my computer, so I'm on computer and on my phone at the same time. I had spoken with Steve Cole about the possibility, because as we go through all of this information, it would be nice to have some sort of topographic representation that we could refer to. I just think that that would be really important for us to be able to see the elevations. Maybe a topo is not exactly what we would need, but something that would give us a representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sure Rick wrote it down somewhere.
As
Thank you.
did I, Sandra. So thank you for that. Tara, to my question.
All right.
Where we go next couple of meetings and steps here.
So Rick, I was actually wondering if you could pull up the pyramid thing. Do you have that available?
Yes, it'll take me a moment. It might
If
take
you're
me a
getting
couple
close
moments,
to
but yeah,
the
let me
pyramid.
open that up, okay?
Thanks.
Holly's favorite chart.
And while I'm pulling that up, Tara, maybe you could go over scheduling. We have our next SAC meeting, I believe, is early August. Or Kathy Martin, maybe you've got that handy while I'm looking up these slides here.
Yep, I'm looking it up right now. Unless Kathy, you have it more easily convenient.
I think I left it on my desk at my office, but I do have it in my files here.
SharePoint is messing with me, for the record.
All right, well, let's keep going and do as much we can verbally, although you guys should know I love this slide. Oh,
Well, yeah, I
might
have,
want to have it on standby as we move forward here.
I now have it, Chair Schroeder. I can report.
Okay.
Let me share my screen here. Here we go. Okay, can you see that?
All right, so we just had our workshop on, we've pretty much gone through all of those first 5 stairs, correct?
Right.
So we've done the workshops on each, we've debriefed those workshops. So we're coming home stretch. And as you said, I believe we don't have a meeting in July, so we're looking to September. And again, are we doing the same process where we talk and then we have the workshop? How does that sequence work as we move to late summer, fall?
Well, I believe our next meeting with your committee is in August, where we're going to talk about the draft GSP. And let's see, yeah, here we go. August 3rd, we've got a special stakeholder advisory committee meeting. And the purpose of that meeting on August 3rd will be to allow your committee to give us your feedback on the draft, the administrative draft GSP that we send to your committee. We'll have a week or two after that to make any changes to it. And then August 15th, so following the special meeting with your committee, we will distribute the draft GSP Valley-wide for public comment.
Okay, so I think my comment to that would be, to make sure that there's ample time, the GSP being shared with the committee so that, we're not having to review what is a, substantive document in, 24 hours. I mean, we don't even want to do 24 hours, so I exaggerate, but, just so that we have time to digest it. And I would ask the committee to anticipate that, that there'll be some review time so that you can come to the meeting meaningfully ready for that and ready for a discussion there. So, Tar,
Right.
anything, or Rick, you want to add to that?
Just that your committee will have about 2 weeks roughly to review it. Might be a couple days more than that.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay, with that, are there any other final, as you guys look forward to that little poolside reading for everybody as you enjoy the summer? So any other questions or comments from the committee at this time? All right, then Tara, if there's nothing else, I believe we can adjourn.
Looks like we can adjourn.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the discussion and have a great evening.